Leadership at the best of times is not easy. It's not a walk in the park. But now leading a culturally diverse team adds additional challenges. In this episode, we want to discuss some of the challenges we face as we function as leaders within varied cultural contexts. What are your leadership values and how will these be perceived by your team? How will you manage the relationship between the local team and the international team? And perhaps the most problematic is how to manage the differing economic realities of the team members.
Welcome to another of Dr. Phil's Leadership Matters podcast. In this series, Phil will be sharing from his decades of serving and leading multicultural teams from Africa to Eastern Europe to Latin America. Just click the link in the description box to download our free resources or the complete study guide. You can also access any of his other podcasts by going to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters.
It probably goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. Leading multicultural teams is even more complicated than leading culturally homogeneous teams. The leadership norms of the host culture will have an impact on the leadership style of the leader. This is a challenge, when they are contrary to the biblical model of servant leadership. An additional challenge is that our leadership values are those that are closest to the core of who we are, and so often they're very difficult to change. Team members from other cultures will likely have deeply held beliefs regarding leadership values, and so there's likely to be a resistance to any change. Issues of leadership generally focus around how decisions are made and the exercise of authority. Will the team be top-down or centralized or more democratic and inclusive? Since each team member is from cultures that may be different values, this can be a challenge. Now, the expectations of the team members are usually culturally defined. Recognize that some cultures expect high levels of participation and others low levels of participation. In addition to decision-making, other functions of leadership such as planning, motivating, advising, training, leading, problem-solving, and so on are all culturally defined. Some team members may expect the leader to do all of these functions, while others expect to be more part of the process. Recognizing the expectations of each member and then helping them understand how their culture impacts their expectations of the leader is an important first step. Then moving the team from their cultural understanding to a biblical one, as I said, that's sometimes where the challenge really is. Now, this is compounded by leadership values held by those in the host culture. Just deferring to the values of the host culture, as we mentioned before, may be the way of least resistance, but it's likely not the wisest, particularly as these may contradict a biblical approach. Through discussion and mentoring, the team leader needs to impart these new values with each team member. Then the team needs to figure out how these kingdom principles affect the dynamics of the team. So while the team leader may have a certain measure of authority and there may even be a perceived power differential depending upon the culture, it is crucial for the overall effectiveness of the team for the leader to harness it for their good and for the mission. See, authority should not be used as a means to get our own way or just to fulfill our own vision. What is your team's perception of leadership values? Is this the same as yours? How can you share these values with them? Now, this may not be applicable to all teams, and it may be getting a bit into the weeds here, but typically a team leader will have the function of dealing with the local and international team. This means that they often have greater access to knowledge and information through their contacts with the international office or network. Now, in order to not increase the power differential needlessly, it is important to communicate how the organization works internationally and how this impacts the local team. One of the most difficult functions as a team leader is to be the liaison between the international team and the local one. Though counterintuitive, it is usually best to share as much information as possible because a vacuum of information inevitably leads to rumors and speculations that often are worse than the truth itself. There's often a clash of values between the local and the international culture, particularly if it is Western and providing the funding. Due to historical dominance and other power differentials, foreign values often have been adopted by the educated minority in many non-Western countries. This minority in any given culture carries a lot of influence. And regardless of the promise of globalization, in many regions of the world there is already a backlash to this dominance. And this is likely to increase, and probably not a completely bad thing. It is worth noting that the modern Western culture, with its emphasis on time consciousness, lack of people focus, and preoccupation with numbers, is the exception to the rule compared to most other cultures. Even in countries who have adopted the outward manifestation of Western values, there are still deeply held local ones. Depending on the ratio of Westerners to locals on the team, there will likely be some level of conflict between these two worlds. This is why it is so important that team leaders facilitate communication regarding local cultural values, which may be counter to biblical ones, and assist the team to take a countercultural approach in functioning as a team with kingdom values instead. Fortunately, in the 21st century, we are continuing to see a transition from Western-led and dominated teams to ones led and governed by the local national leadership. What does this new partnership look like? I think for starters, nationals will need to consider what role foreign team members are still to play and communicate this to them. Rather than being discarded, perhaps they can function best as mentors and coaches, using their experience and network to strengthen the local team and its purpose and its ministry. In practical terms, the function of reporting is also impacted by culture. Reporting for many more American-leaning organizations can seem to be more of a public relations campaign, basically only emphasizing the positive and not the negative and focusing on numbers. From a European perspective, this is looked down upon as they tend to value brutal honesty, reporting the good, the bad, and the ugly. But the reality is that local multicultural teams that interact with other international multicultural teams have a greater opportunity for misunderstanding and conflict, to say the least. But this also provides lots of opportunity for growth, both personally and in the organization. So how do you communicate between the international and the local team, if that's your role? Do you need to make adjustments in order to diminish some of the power differential? To what degree has the host culture adopted Western values? Now, is there a backlash to these? And what role can you as a leader play as a liaison between these two worlds?
You can view or listen to any of Phil's other podcast series by going to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters. These include Mentoring Intelligence, Finishing Our Race, the Fivefold Ministry, as well as a variety of other leadership series he has taught over the years. You could also check out our Christian Leadership Institute, which is a unique competency-based ministerial mentorship. To download any of our resources associated with these series, visit our library of materials at icm.org/resources.
Now, when it comes to decision making, the different cultural approaches or patterns of logic are important to understand. Now, contextual logic uses analogies or stories to make the point. It is very common in Africa and Latin America. While linear logic uses principles and ideas to prove the point, which is more common in America and in some European contexts. Though countries such as Germany and others in more northern European contexts have a dialectical form of logic, which employs arguments and proofs made on both sides of the argument, after much discussion or compromise is made and a decision is eventually reached. I say eventually because this is usually a long process and drives those cultures which value quick decisions. It kind of drives them a bit crazy. I remember when I was living in Berlin and involved in several multicultural teams and hearing the frustration level of Western missionaries who were more used to just making a decision and moving on in one meeting rather than taking multiple meetings to seek to come to a consensus which seems never to be reached. Of course, this took longer, but once a decision was made, with this approach, there's usually a greater buy-in by everyone, and things move along then more efficiently. Now, a fourth type of logic is existential logic, which is typically associated with parts of Scandinavia and France and other countries. This is more of an intuitive approach, which seems to take kind of a leap of faith in discovering new facts and new truth. Facts are not as important, though, as the feelings and emotional response created in others. As with situational leadership, regardless of our default culture, we can adapt and use each of the decision-making processes to fit the right type of situation. See, each of these approaches produces different results. See, for simple decisions, linear logic is quick and efficient. But for more complex decisions involving more people, a dialectical logic approach will take longer, but will produce greater consensus and often less hurt feelings. An effective multicultural team then seeks to ensure that every member is heard and has the freedom to share their opinions and help in the decision-making process. This ownership of the decision then creates an environment that minimizes the tendency of one person or small group to take over and abuse their power. Let's discuss the 4 patterns of logic with your team and how does this impact the decision making of you and your team. So we've been discussing some issues regarding money, but let me offer a few more thoughts beyond what I shared before. And one of the main issues that multicultural teams deal with is the varied economic reality between team members. This is usually based on their country of origin and the cultural values as to how finances should be used. While there are clear biblical values regarding finances and wealth, the outworking of these are impacted by each member's own cultural values and from the countries they came from. In order to maintain unity in the group, it is important to discuss this issue and perhaps even establish certain policies regarding finances and lifestyle. This is particularly important as it directly impacts the witness of the team within the host country. And the fact is that lifestyle does impact one's credibility, and so we have to help each team member arrive at a lifestyle that builds bridges and not barriers to the host society and culture, the very people that we're seeking to serve. Now, a particularly problematic issue is the one of salary levels among members of multicultural teams. A rule of thumb would be to establish salaries that are similar to equivalent occupations in the country, such as teachers, for example. But consideration has to be given to foreign team members who will likely have other expenses such as taxes in their home country, pensions, health care, and other issues such as travel. Another issue is if there is a mix on the team of those who are salaried and those who raise their own support, or a combination of both. Are those funds raised locally or in their home country? Each situation requires that a team leader discuss these matters with the team member privately and then address the issue generally as a group. Team leaders can help non-Western team members exercise their faith to raise up financial partners from their own countries, even if this is not common in their own country or in their culture. See, in the 21st century, unlike the last century, the model of raising one's own support, or as some people call living by faith, is not functioning as it once did, due to the changing demographics and the generational values. This may mean allowing time for bivocational work to supplement living expenses and other new support models that may arise. While there are no rules that work in every context, the principle of understanding, fairness, and flexibility need to be exercised by the leader and by the team. Maybe have a personal discussion with each team member regarding their financial values and how this impacts the team and its goals moving forward. So as I wrap up this episode, I want to make a few comments regarding marriage and how the team is impacted by married couples and vice versa. The very nature of missions work, or ministry in general, is that husbands and wives are a team, and it is virtually impossible to be involved in such work without support of one spouse. This is different than other professions, which do not necessarily require as close of a working relationship between spouses. So it's important that the team leader is aware of the dynamics within each team member's family unit. The reality is that often the spouse of the team members experiences as much stress, or perhaps even more, than the spouse on the team involved in the day-to-day ministry. Because they're often involved and engaged in local culture on a very personal level as they take care of many of the necessities of life, from shopping to paying bills and so on. This is why effort needs to be made in order to involve the spouse who is not a member of the team to connect relationally with the rest of the team. The unique pressures faced by team members who are single needs to also be addressed. If steps are not taken to deal with the issue of loneliness, it is likely they will not stay on the team and function well. The team leader needs to make sure that opportunity is given for them to make friends and to include them in the family events of the team. Maybe be sure to spend some time with each family represented in the next little while on your team to assess their health and ways that you can help serve them. Your leadership is key, and we have been looking at some of the specific challenges facing the leader of a multicultural team. As we wrap up our series next time with our last episode, I will discuss a few more related issues. I'm sure you'll be able to join me as we wrap up then.
Thank you for listening to Leadership Matters and subscribing and sharing us. If you would like to have your own copy of this study, just click on the link in the description box. For any of our other leadership resources, check out our website, www.icmcanada.org/resources.